Welcome. I'm Faye Waterman, the Conversation Curator, and my guest today is Chiara Barbera. And Chiara is going to talk about or share with you who she is, what she does, and why she's so passionate about it. Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you, Faye. It's wonderful to be here today talking to you. I love our conversation, so I'm very excited to catch up again. So as you kindly mentioned, my name's Chiara Barbera. I am the founder of Experience Assaggio, and essentially what Experience Assaggio is, it's a way to preserve Italian traditions by celebrating nonni, which is Italian for grandparents. So I was brought up with 4 Italian grandparents in Brisbane, Australia. And I guess they've just instilled this love and passion for the Italian culture in me growing up. It's very much been like being in Italy. And I remember the first time I made it over to Italy, I was like, oh, it's like, this is my home. I was like, these people are the same as me. They do the same things as we do. They eat the same food. So it very much felt like, what growing up in Italy would have been like. I went in and I lived over there for a little while, and I was obviously immersed in the culture and the traditions. And when I came back home, I just found myself looking at my grandparents, and I just thought, what's going to happen when this generation of grandparents are no longer with us to be able to share those traditions, to be able to share, the recipes, the gardening tips, the pastimes, all those little things that I feel like we kind of lose time for in our day-to-day lives because naturally we just get so busy. I thought, how are we going to preserve these traditions and preserve their stories in the way that they would, take a whole morning just to prepare fresh pasta or fresh sausages and just really enjoy the whole process. So assaggio is my way of documenting them and allowing people to kind of follow along step by step with nonni and being able to kind of share their stories and traditions so people can have a beautiful experience with the Italian culture.
And that is absolutely wonderful, Chiara. And sharing time with your nonnas is very special because they're not going to be here when you get older, but they are going to be here in spirit because you have recorded them cooking, showing you how to do things the traditional way, which is really important for a culture. And I think we're blessed with people such as yourself to be able to preserve a culture that is special to so many. And Australians have become lovers of Italian culture and many other cultures, which is really beautiful because we're really only a young country. And learning about other cultures, their food, how Italians cook food, but it's not just about the food, it's about cooking the food, putting it on the table, sitting around the table as a family and friends, having that conversation, finishing the food, but the conversation continues. So it brings people together. And that is a lost tradition here in Australia for many because we're so busy thinking about what the next thing to do is. So therefore, what you're doing is bringing the Italian culture into the Australian culture and reminding us that we need to cook those beautiful meals, those homemade sausages, the homemade pastas, the meatballs, the sauce for the meatballs, those sorts of things, and put it on the table and bring people together and sit and have those conversations.
Definitely. And one of my favorite parts about our culture is that you do really, unite around food. And often my friends will laugh at me, especially my Italian friends. We all understand. We'll go, oh, I've got a family lunch on, and they go, oh, great, I'll see you at like 5 o'clock, because we know that it'll go for hours and hours and hours, and often it turns into dinner as well. And I think that's the beauty of it, is you kind of get carried away. And I guess through assaggio, I'm also trying to teach people that, a recipe isn't just you put this in, you put that in, and this is how it turns out. It's really about kind of connecting to the recipe and, you know, enjoying the process. And we have this famous saying in Italian, and it says "a occhio," which means there's no measurement. You just got to look by eye and you'll know how much is the right amount, which is, so for some people, my dad's a mechanical engineer and he hates it. He's like, no, I need to know. Is it a quarter of a cup? Is it half a teaspoon? Like, what is the measurement? But I guess the beauty is that, you know, it's a nice way to educate people to learn about, oh, okay, like I can connect with this kind of with what I'm doing. I don't have to mindlessly follow a recipe. I'm kind of going, oh, okay, well, this is how much I've got. Like maybe if I add that much salt, it'll help. And then about fine tuning that as you go along as well. So it's a nice way of showing that. My Zia, who's one of the featured nonni on Assaggio, so my auntie, my great auntie, her name's Nonna Sarina on our website. She always laughs because every time I say, oh, Zia, how much of that did you put in? And she's like, oh, cute. Like, she's like, by eye. She's like, I can't tell you a measurement. So it's quite funny because, yeah, even since we started, I love that, you know, my nonna will say, okay, now you've got to add a pinch of salt. And you see this pinch of salt, she literally like scoops up a whole handful of salt and chucks it in the pan, and you're like, that's what she means by a pinch of salt. So I guess it's really important that we've got the videos of them as well, because, you know, first of all, it allows them to be able to talk about their stories as they're going along. And I do really try and, you know, prompt them with some questions as we go. But also it's a way to say, oh, okay, that's what a pinch of salt means. It doesn't mean, you know, a little pinch as some people might think.
It's interesting because it is creating a love of food, and also, you know, the history of food, what foods that were available 100 years ago are not available now. So there have been substitutes on the way. And that history of learning about what was used in the past to what is used now it's kind of interesting, because that fascinates me, the history of food and the history of the recipes that used to be still brought together today in a different way, because some of the foods aren't available, but, you know, you make do with what you've got. And with measurements, well, I know people that you've got to measure it. You can't just cook without measuring. Well, I cook without measuring. I think, oh, that'll do. And that's how I am. But my daughter gets a bit upset with me because, Mum, you've got to measure. And I said, no, I don't. Anyway, so yeah, so it's like your nonnas are retaining the history, the culture, the bringing the foods, the different foods, the different vegetables together to make them into something amazing that tastes bellissimo.
True. Brava. It's funny you mentioned that too, because like I think if you look at the history as well of their recipes, a lot of them are, you know, they're post-war survivors. So they came from a time in Italy specifically where there was a lot of poverty, and a lot of the time if you didn't grow it in your backyard, you couldn't have access to it. So it's been fascinating as well, just learning from them, and they do share little glimpses of their stories as we go along. But one recipe that I'm currently in the process of putting together is actually pickled tomatoes. And it's fascinating because a lot of the times the history of the recipe is that they had to preserve the fresh produce because they would get so much of it in one season, and then they'd have to find a way to preserve it and make sure that they could enjoy it during the winter periods when there's less crops. So actually one of my my great uncles that's on it, Nonno Sebastiano, he talks about how when he was in grade 4, I think it was from memory, he would come home from school and he'd have to help his dad plow the land, because in summer they would have produce, but in winter their town was up in the mountains in Sicily and it was covered by snow. So for 6 months they were completely snowed under, so they'd have to kind of figure out how much supplies they would need for the winter periods. And it's just fascinating, their survival skills. So one recipe, the one that I'm working on at the moment, is pickled tomatoes. And the fascinating part about that is you need to have green tomatoes. You can't use ripe tomatoes for this recipe. But there's no way to buy green tomatoes anymore. So my uncle and auntie, the only way that they can do this is by growing their own crops. So we, Zio and I have also put together a bit of a video for people that are interested in, you know, putting their hand at gardening. And it's so awesome, like seeing his amazing knowledge because, you know, he learned from his grandfather, like not even his father, his grandfather. So it's incredible when you actually sit down and you take the time to listen to them, and you just have this appreciation for them, and you're like, wow, like the amount of things that they've learned, the amount of people they've learned from, like generations. It's like hundreds of years of just, you know, trial and error, and they're just living and breathing it. It's pretty amazing.
It is. And so you are keeping that tradition going, Chiara, and allowing us Australians in particular, because the Italian culture just keeps going and doing it, to have a better appreciation of the foods that are cooked in Italy, that are here now in Australia with the Italian restaurants, which are probably not cooked exactly the same as your nonnas do. But what a great way to share a culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a nice way to also really bring the culture back to its roots and kind of give that appreciation to the grandparents of the generation that, you know, sometimes they quite often go forgotten. And I think this is a nice way to really, I say this all the time, like to really shine the spotlight on them. And they're the stars. Like, they're, by no means am I the star of a subject. I'm just kind of like the conduit between the old and the new. But I really believe that, like, you know, they have stories and they have experiences worth sharing. And I think it's such an important way to really make them feel special and make them feel appreciated for what they have to share.
Absolutely. And I look forward to seeing your first book for Asagio, with all the recipes and the photos and the stories and everything else that you're actually doing. And there is a lot of work in what you're doing. So congratulations. And I look forward to, I will experience more and more of what you do down the track. So thank you, Chiara, for sharing.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Faye.
My pleasure. I'm Faye Waterman, the Conversation Curator, and I'll be back again. Bye for now.